Welcome to CTS's educational series for IT management and company stakeholders. Today's topic is the role of network firewalls, the gateway to maximizing cybersecurity protection. Today's goal is that, we all know that there is a greater demand for network protection, and firewall technology has become the first line of defense to secure and block threatening incoming traffic. So we are hoping that we can educate the small business owner and IT users on technology and roles of a firewall. Our agenda today is really to go over what the firewalls are, their roles, and different types of technology, along with exploring the trends of cyber attacks and user strategies and user strategies to best protect your environment. At the end, there'll be questions that we're going to ask ourselves that you can be mindful of when thinking about where you are with your company's protection. As a result, we hope that you're going to take away and appreciate what a firewall does, what the trends are, how firewalls are different today than they were many years ago, and understand why it's so important to deploy a proper firewall solution. I'm Michelle Carlo. I am with CTS Services. We are experts in IT management and security solutions for small to mid-sized businesses. We've been around for over 30 years. We do managed services, remote monitoring and remediation, sales service, installation and repair of servers, peripheral devices, printers, and more. With us today, we have Mike Marone and Mike Nero from SonicWall. SonicWall is a leader in network access, cloud, and endpoint security. This combined team has over 20 years of experience in technology and cybersecurity, helping partners and end user businesses like us securing their environments from cyber threats. Before I pass the reins over to Mike and Mike, I wanted to just thank Jack Langt from the United Chamber of Commerce for his dedication to the business community for allowing educational content that is relevant to protecting businesses and their communities. This session is going to be recorded. Put all of your questions in the Q&A, and time permitting, all of those questions will be answered, and if not, an email link will be sent over with the answers and a recording to this video. So with no further ado, I am going to give you over to the mics.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and I want to thank everyone else for joining in today, and hopefully at the end of this, a few takeaways would be our ultimate goal, and hopefully some education. So before I pass it on to Mr. Mike Nero to walk through at a high level some of the ins and outs of Firewall, SonicWall, we've all seen this, and it's really now we continue to update this slide as we see it's been over 8 months, the past 8 months that we've seen this pandemic, and it's really ravaging our security landscape. And it's been something that SonicWall, fortunately, has always been planning the remote workforce, but we went from 30% to almost 100%, and I don't think that's going to be changing anytime soon. So this is imperative to understand how the security landscape has changed, what CTS is doing alongside SonicWall to protect the remote users as if they're in the office or in a particular building. So this is happening. It's something that's there. We've been aware of it. Now I'll pass it over to Mike Nero. He'll kind of go through some of the ins and outs, give you a sense of what's happening around us, how we're seeing things, how we're evolving and innovating with products. So further ado, I'll pass it over to Mike Nero, and then we'll talk with you guys in a bit. Thank you very much.
All right, great. Thank you, Mike, and thank you everyone for your time this morning. Bear with me one moment here. Just trying to move forward a slide here. There we go. Apologies, I'm having some challenges moving between the slides, Michelle. Bear with me one moment here.
So Mike, if you'd like, I can, if you can't control it, I can take the slides. Do you have access? There you go.
Sure.
Great.
And actually, if you don't mind going back, it looks like I can't go back one. Let me try that. Okay, perfect. Thank you. I think we're all set here. Apologies. Okay, so SonicWall has a global threat report that we build on an annual basis, and this is data that's collected from what we call sensors. And a sensor can be anything from an endpoint that might have our endpoint protection or a firewall that exists in the field. And so we have this report we can correlate from all these millions of sensors that are in the field that really help us and our customers understand the trends of really what's happening in the market. 2020 has obviously been a different year in many ways, and you're starting to see the changes of that here. So in 2020, we saw year-over-year traditional malware attacks dip significantly. You'll see encrypted threats dip significantly as well, but I think this is more a byproduct of folks not working in their corporate offices where that type of inspection is occurring. Cryptojacking is one that we've also seen dip a little bit year-over-year for the first half. If you're not familiar with that type of attack, that's a script or an application that would take over your computer and leverage it in the background to basically crypto mine and make money for bad actors out in the field that are leveraging it and then depositing those cryptocurrencies into their e-wallets. It's kind of an interesting newer trend we're seeing, but you can see 41.4 million incidents we saw in that arena. Intrusion attempts are up. That might have been a byproduct of maybe not a full staff of IT in-house analyzing traffic and keeping monitoring of things. People are trying to poke holes in environments on a more heavy basis than they traditionally have. So that was 2.3 trillion incidents. In ransomware, again, we saw it kind of reemerge and become a problem again. And they're doing some new things there that we can talk about. Finally, IoT malware is another huge factor right now. We have things like surveillance cameras, smart thermostats, smartwatches, different instrumentation of that nature that traditionally is not always up to date in terms of software, may have some exploits. So we're seeing those types of devices hit, and the reason being that's a really easy gateway into your environment at that point, where they can then move laterally and do some other things in your environment maliciously. All right, just quickly here, I wanted to touch on what a firewall is. There's a lot of misconception about what they do and some differences in the industry between different types of solutions. So we'll start with a router versus a firewall. And all of us have had home routers at some point. Traditionally, a router just kind of makes sure traffic gets to its destination. You may even see terminology along the lines of stateful packet inspection, so some firewalling at a basic level that occur on a home router or a router. Really, that type of inspection is only looking at what we call the header of the traffic, so the very beginning. And all it looks at is the source, destination, and protocol, basically, to ensure the traffic's coming from where it says it is, where it's going to where it needs to, over the protocol that's been negotiated. Deep packet inspection, which occurs on a modern firewall in the industry, will take that a step further. So that will actually look at what we mentioned previously in the header of the traffic, but it will also pull apart the payload within the traffic and inspect the content within it. Think of this as when you're going through airport security. Traditionally, when you walk in, you hand your ID and a ticket. That would be your stateful packet inspection, but when you put your bag on the belt and it goes through the X-ray machine, that's more of your deep packet inspection type solution. Now that enables us to do some other things. So you'll see I have next-gen threat prevention listed here. The firewall itself can run many different services. I'll go through a couple of those here. but they can typically leverage something like gateway antivirus, where we're actually looking at the payload, scanning the traffic, and looking for known threats that we've seen in the past. That way we can block the threat before it ever touches your endpoint. You don't necessarily have to. You should have a layered approach, but ideally the firewall will catch it before an endpoint product would even look at it. Beyond that, we can do things like intrusion prevention. So we can look for pattern-based attacks that we've seen in the past. For example, something like cross-site scripting, or perhaps you're out of date on your Windows patches on your endpoint and somebody is attempting to leverage a known exploit. Typically that's referred to as virtual patching, but that's a subset of feature of intrusion prevention. Going down a little further here, you'll also see something called application control. The concept behind that is that we have the ability to, at layer 7, identify what applications are being run in the environment. For example, something like Dropbox, maybe YouTube, and really give you granular control over those. So we can do things like allow or block, but we can also leverage something like bandwidth management. And bandwidth management would let you throttle that application. Very helpful in an office where we might have folks leveraging something like YouTube that can, obviously with multiple 4K streams, start to consume a significant amount of your bandwidth. We can leverage that solution to throttle that application. And then finally, we have all of this insight into the different things happening in the environment via the firewall. So we want to really be able to look into what's occurring then and have a consumable format of data as to the threats we're blocking and what we're seeing. So there's typically a reporting or analytics type solution where I can deep dive and see perhaps where Joe in HR is visiting at 3 p.m. on a Wednesday, or I might want to see what type of intrusion prevention hits we had in our IPS engine. But it'll give you insight to all of those features and kind of what's happening in the environment by leveraging an analytics solution. One component I didn't mention with the next-gen threat prevention engines, we are seeing a push towards what we call a sandboxing solution in the industry at this point. And really the benefit of that is, I mentioned that we can scan for known threats leveraging our gateway antivirus, but what happens when it's a zero-day, brand new threat or an unknown threat? Sandboxing solutions are really the answer to this. So we have what we call Capture Advanced Threat Protection for our solution. This solution will leverage 3 different sandbox engines after going through a pre-filter. So we have multiple reputation databases that we reference, as well as run it through multiple different AV engines to really identify if it's something we've seen before as a known good file or a known bad file. That way we can either block it at that point, hand it off, or send it to the sandboxing engine if it's something we've not seen. So when we send it to the sandbox engine, the file is sent to the cloud. We detonate it in 3 parallel virtual environments that will simulate behavior of the file and try to provoke even the most resistant malware. Unfortunately, because sandbox solutions have been out for a bit now and hackers are aware of them, they're starting to get more creative. They'll do things like set timers in the malware and a number of different other things that they do to become more difficult to detect. So we have a 4th engine that we developed in-house called real-time deep memory inspection. And this is very effective at catching threats in near real time at the memory level. So if you're familiar with things like Spectre, or some of the other memory-based attacks we've seen in the past, this type of solution is very effective against those threats. So Capture Advanced Threat Protection is available across the entire portfolio. We can leverage this solution at our firewalls, which is where I would say it's most common, but also we have virtual solutions, virtual firewall that you can leverage Capture ATP. And you'll see similarly our remote access solution will also provide this protection. Going down the list here, you'll also see we have wireless, endpoint product, and email security solutions that will provide that same zero-day threat protection. And finally, we also support things like G Suite or O365 with our cloud app security solution, where we can also leverage Capture ATP. So just for some insight as to how that solution would work, I'd just like to show you how the sandboxing engine would scan files. So I just want to build this out quickly so we can review that. There's some unique things that happen here as well. So you'll see Capture Security Center up top really gives us that visibility and control of our complete environment. This would be things like analytics and management of the solution. As the file comes in, it would either be identified as a known threat or known good file, at which point, if it's bad, we can block it. And that's one of 10 billion signatures we have. If it's something we've not seen in the past, it would then be deemed unknown. And that's where you'll see off to the right, that's 1% of files. It would then go through the multi-sandbox engine, in parallel to our real-time deep memory inspection engine. And from there, we have the ability to hold the file until we identify it as good or bad, at which point if it was bad, we would block it, good, we would hand it off to the endpoint. The nice thing is, as we learn and we see these threats, these are then handed off to our research team, which is Capture Labs. Capture Labs then builds a signature because it's now a known threat, and that becomes one of those known pieces where we can block it up front. We would hand out signature updates to the existing firewalls, and we'd be able to block those going forward. Let me jump to there, bear with me one moment here. So total malware in 2020, and you're seeing some interesting trends here again. We mentioned malware attacks were down. So during the first half, we saw a dip from 4.8 billion all the way down to 3.2 billion attacks. So it was a 24% drop for mid-year. And there's a number of reasons behind this. I mentioned zero-day threats. Really, anything that's targeted is typically going to be a zero-day or unknown threat. So you really have to protect against the things that have not been seen in the industry. There are tools out there that allow the easy manipulation of existing known threats to make them become unknown. So it will alter pieces. You can merge different threats together and really create what they call a malware cocktail. So that's why we're seeing these known malware threats kind of dip a little bit. Phishing is still a huge concern in the industry as well. So we're seeing a significant uptick in phishing attacks. Phishing is typically when a type of credential is scraped from the endpoint. So you'll receive an email, click a link. It may ask for login credentials, financials, whatever it may be. We'll get into why this is the case momentarily here. As far as what we're seeing with Capture Advanced Threat Protection, so these unknown or zero-day threats, Capture is identifying a number of different file types which are most prevalent. You'll see the distribution here. So PDFs accounted for just under 11% of the new and malicious type files that were passing through networks. Archives hovered around 22%, so your zip files, RAR files, compressed files. Office documents, interestingly, accounted for 23%. That's a pretty massive increase. We saw a 176% increase. This could be due to folks sharing files on a more regular basis as opposed to having someone come to their desk to review it being in the office. But this is a significant uptick in terms of the threats that are being delivered in that package. And then finally, the last two, executables, which are traditionally, I would almost say the most common, have dropped a little bit. And that's probably because those are being scanned on a more regular basis. And then scripts. So we're starting to see a lot of fileless type malware that occurs in a script on a web page infecting endpoints. And crypto mining, that's typically how that type of threat is actually distributed. We talked about real-time deep memory inspection a little bit and how it can help identify unknown threats that we haven't seen before. Just to have an understanding of the number that it's found, the uptick was pretty drastic here. We found a 63% increase for the first half year over year, which is pretty significant. This tells us a couple of things. First being unknown threats are more common. Number two, traditional sandbox engines, which are those first three engines we simulate the behavior in, they're finding ways to become more evasive to those solutions. So RTDMI is a very effective tool in really catching these zero-day unknown or targeted threats. We're also seeing that non-standard port malware is hitting a new high. So when I say non-standard port, your standard ports for web browsing are typically 80 and 443. So we're seeing attacks launch over non-standard ports to an application. So you're browsing the web, they might leverage a totally different port, let's say like 23 or something like that, for that traffic to try and bypass scanning. Internet of Things malware has also spiked drastically, so we saw an increase of 50%. I believe a lot of this has to do with the fact that folks are working from home, and it makes more sense to target softer endpoints where maybe there's not perimeter protection. So we're seeing a pretty significant uptick here. We recorded 20.2 million IoT attacks since January, leading up to the June timeframe. That was when our last report came out. Encrypted threats, and this statistic can be a little bit misleading, and I'll get into why, but encrypted threats are a significant vector right now too. So really, when you look at something like HTTPS traffic, that type of protocol is designed to keep your data secure in transit, right? So between your endpoint and your bank, your endpoint and Amazon, whatever it might be, the idea is that we can securely encrypt that data and transfer it end to end. Now, the challenge with this is hackers understand that traditional solutions are not inspecting that encrypted traffic because it doesn't have insider visibility or the ability to pull it apart. So hackers understand that, and they understand that that threat is now stealth or invisible to a traditional firewall. So they're leveraging these encrypted transits to pass malware down to your endpoint. So in 2020, we saw 1 in 12 SonicWall customers with DPI SSL turned on, identifying malware over encrypted traffic. Obviously, a number of things can happen outside of that. If we're not inspecting that encrypted traffic, we wouldn't know that. So those statistics are not included here. Similarly, folks were not necessarily in the office for that period. So if they're not behind the firewall inspecting that traffic, that statistic would not be reflected here either. So we're seeing a drastic uptick here. It is a significant factor that you'll want to take into account. And sizing is another factor you want to take into account. There's something called concurrent sessions and then throughput. Those two components are critical because it's much more CPU intensive to scan this type of traffic. So we saw a massive uptick in crypto jacking again this year. This is a pretty easy way for a bad actor to really leverage your endpoints to do their currency mining. So they're doing things like mining for Bitcoin, XRP, whatever the hot e-currency is for that given period. And they're leveraging things like scripts on web pages that kind of happen transparently to you. You may not even realize it's running in the background, but you're now contributing to their mining farm, and they're making revenue off of your endpoints. So North America actually saw a 252% increase due to a crypto jacking tool called XMRig. I'll show you why that's important. There's a number of variants of this specific crypto jacking tool out there. So see there's a 11, a 4, there's variants out there of this same tool. But you'll see that was the most popular by quite a large margin. You're seeing about 28 million attacks there just for the first half, and then you'll see a significant drop off underneath. The variants will typically come into play because things get identified and they'll alter it a little bit so that it's not caught by any signature-based engine. One other thing we saw during COVID, and I think this is pretty straightforward, is that we saw web conferencing increases drastically, right? So we went from the traditional on-site face-to-face meetings to these virtual seminars, virtual meetings, things of that nature. So we saw a 632% increase, or an 8-fold increase by mid-June of Zoom traffic, for example. And you'll see Hangouts and Zoom were also massive upticks. WebEx is typically a slower adoption curve due to cost, I believe. So you'll see that wasn't quite as drastic in terms of the waves here, but it also saw some upticks and downticks during that period of COVID. So this is just kind of a nice overview of the items we've touched on. So you'll see, for example, 23% of malware use those non-standard ports we spoke about. Another piece that I think is exciting and important here is that 121,000 never before seen zero-day attack variants were found by our real-time deep memory inspection engine. So that's 664 per day. And that could be across many sites until that signature update's pushed, right? We saw 535 ransomware attacks per customer. And remember, these are attempts that were blocked. So these are successful blocks in these instances. And then 2,306 phishing attacks per customer. So pretty significant counts here. Just looking at the bottom of the slide here, you'll see the various different attack vectors. So whether that's something like a zero-day or never-before-seen variant, or an identified malicious code piece. As we go down the chain, we have things like phishing that we spoke about, encrypted threats. Really, SonicWall has a solution for every aspect of this chart here. And you'll see we have everything from, we're known for really the security appliances, but beyond that, we do things like email security. We have a secure remote access solution. where you can get very granular with the resources that folks have access to securely, no matter where they are or what device they're on. We have things along the lines of a cloud app security solution. So if you're leveraging a G Suite O365, you can protect your data, provide anti-spam and anti-phishing, and encryption and DLP for your environment to ensure there's no sensitive data leaking from your environment. And that can be knowingly or unknowingly. Folks sometimes send out data they don't realize is sensitive, and you can be alerted to that. We have an endpoint protection solution and a Wi-Fi solution that can be cloud managed as well. So just to come full circle with what Mike opened with, we saw this shift in the industry with COVID hitting, and it really was a total rethinking of how folks would work. And the interesting thing, SonicWall had this vision of boundless cybersecurity long before really COVID hit. And it was exciting to have solutions in place to keep our customers' data secure, whether they were on-prem or cloud apps, no matter where you're working, whether that's at a branch office, a coffee shop, your home, your car, really wherever you're working. We can protect you against every kind of known threat or unknown threat for that matter. So things we've seen and haven't seen in the past. And on any endpoint possible, right? That can be things from a notebook, a cell phone. It could be a smartwatch you have on or a camera in your home that we can protect, or in your business for that matter. And this could be any infrastructure. This could be a hybrid infrastructure. It could be a full cloud or completely on-premise. And then finally, any type of network, whether you're leveraging something like a cable modem from the service provider or you have a 5G failover card, we can protect that traffic. And really, this applies to any vertical. We start out with the smallest and go all the way to the 100 gig throughput in the largest data centers. And with that, I will hand it back to Mike. Actually, I can speak to this one too. So the cyber threat report we covered, you'll see here we have a more in-depth copy. The CTS team will provide a follow-up afterwards in terms of this document, but it'll go into much more depth, and it will also talk about the different protection components we spoke of and how they're relevant to each of the threat types that we're seeing in industry trends. And we update this typically twice a year.
So as we go through this presentation, there is so many things that are probably beyond the scope of a normal small business. So I believe that many participants today might be overwhelmed with where they are or what state of their network is at. And today, like you, all of our participants are using different types of technology for this video conferencing. So it has not been without problem. So with that said, we're all kind of going through a few things right now. So I am going to open the floor up to some questions and answers from that Bob has been fielding, and we can go ahead and answer those and then maybe press on. Bob? Okay.
There we go.
All right.
So we've got a few questions. Does turning on the firewall or upgrading a firewall to next generation technology have any effect on performance of the network?
Yeah, so turning on next-gen threat prevention features do have a performance impact. We do publish, and typically most vendors publish throughputs with the different features enabled. So you'll want to scope accordingly, which CTS can assist with ensuring that the firewall sized correctly. Similarly, when we spoke about looking at encrypted traffic, that's something that's even more CPU intensive. The firewall brokers basically a root of trust between your laptop or desktop and the outside source to really pull apart that traffic, inspect it, and then re-encrypt it before giving it back to the endpoint. So that piece as well you'd want to take into account, and I would say that is honestly probably one of the largest threat vectors right now because a lot of folks are not inspecting that encrypted traffic still.
Okay, great. I have another question. when it comes to firewall technology, do I need just one? In other words, hardware, software, or cloud? I mean, or do I need a mix of it?
Yeah, so depending on your environment, it really can be a multi-product approach, right? Like if you're running a hybrid solution and maybe you're leveraging cloud, you have AWS. We do have a cloud solution in the form of a virtual firewall, but you'd also want to protect your physical environment where your endpoints reside, so your office. So you typically have a physical appliance on site, and you have a virtual firewall in AWS, which can even, by the way, broker the VPN tunnel between the two, so you're not paying for additional tunnels from Amazon. So it's kind of a nice perk of the solution, but it'll also protect your cloud infrastructure because by default, with an AWS type session or Azure, there's no firewalling protection in that environment.
Okay, the last question I have is, what are best practices for me or in small business for staying protected?
Yeah, so best practices to stay protected. Number one, I would absolutely recommend something like a next-gen firewall. So that should be part of your security practice where you're scanning not just, like we mentioned, stateful packet inspection type data. That's great as well, but really that deep packet inspection is where you're going to catch any type of targeted threat. Number two, make sure those features are enabled and also leverage a zero-day protection solution. So something like Capture APT where it sandboxes the file really to get an ultimate verdict and find the resilient malware that will hide from signature-based approaches. Finally, you always want a layered approach. So there's other things you can do as well, but really endpoint protection is another key component. There's things out there now that will even provide you with something like auto rollback if for some reason something like a piece of ransomware were to make its way onto a system and successfully start encrypting data. So you can auto rollback using shadow copies on the endpoint to have your last good known state of the endpoint in place without really any intervention. So there's a lot of different features you can leverage. And this obviously can be a much deeper discussion, which CTS can absolutely assist with.
And I think it's Mike here. I'd like to add to what Mike said. I think he kind of nailed it where, you know, the question would be, do I get a firewall? And if not, will a router work? I mean, a router could just be deemed as an open door, open and close. That's about it. Where a firewall comes in, and especially in next gen, where you have the components within it, but then you also have, as Mike mentioned, the layered side. So the more layers you add, will be the more protection that that the endpoints would have. So it's an extremely good point. I don't know if there's any more questions.
One more came in if we have time.
Sure.
It relates to something that was said earlier. IoT threats. What is that?
Yeah, so your Internet of Things
question.
is really any connected device. This can be things like a cell phone, a thermostat, a
refrigerator. It could be a refrigerator for that matter, right?
It could be. You could have a tablet in front of your refrigerator that could be susceptible to this type of threat. And remember, these devices don't typically receive the attention something like a Windows or Mac endpoint does, right? They're not getting updates as frequently. And because of that, I mean, you have cameras out there that are 20 years old that have multiple exploits that folks can leverage to get into your network. And then once they're in, they can do whatever they want, right? They're now on your trusted network if you don't separate that traffic. And they can start moving laterally and hitting other devices from that camera, that smart refrigerator, whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm. And I think what makes it so scary is in today's world with everyone being remote, who knows what that home environment's like. And I think Mike Nero probably can relate to this. One of our CTOs, Dimitri, always says a dirty network, which it really is. We don't know what we're going into and what we're connecting to, and especially the devices inside that household, whether it be siblings, friends, significant others, whatever the case may be. So it becomes very dangerous.
So at the end of the day, I think that the whole purpose of what a firewall is and what this type of solution presents is that we as end users in business needs to have some type of either cloud-based or physical appliance to be that first level of defense to block that bad traffic coming into our household, our company, our refrigerator or thermostat. And, you know, we need to look at what those solutions are, and do we have them, or are they relevant in my environment right now?
I think another question popped up there, Bob, I believe, a cybersecurity question in regards to certifications. Would you mind reading that out?
Yeah, go ahead.
Would you mind reading that out? I don't know if I...
Certainly will do. Do you recommend getting certified to cybersecurity management systems like ISO 27001?
Yeah, so there are a number of industry certifications that absolutely help have a better understanding, and there's different requirements based on the sector and the industry and so on. One course that I found valuable just on understanding how everything works, the CEH, will actually go through how the attacks happen. So you have an understanding of how you can protect against them. There are paid courses. I think there's some free ones still. You can get some CAN courses that are pre-recorded, but they'll go into a lot of detail on that type of thing. And most of what I've learned, I found came from that type of course because it was more relevant to what I do day to day, and it helped me understand how to protect against those types of threats.
Mike, if you can provide me details, the follow-up email will send information about those courses.
Sure, definitely.
I think for timing, we should probably move on. We have a couple more slides, unless there's other questions. And of course, and I'm sure Michelle and Bob will mention this, feel free to email CTS team any questions that you may think of afterwards. More than happy to recap everything and answer those. So if there's anything that's missed.
Sure.
So I think just to go back one there, Michelle, just to highlight there, thank you. Just to highlight, like, partner with a specialist. And SonicWall has and is today a channel-friendly company, which means we only work with certified partners. CTS has been with SonicWall for over 15 years and is a secure first partner, which means they have certifications and they are specialists in many different areas, not only from our hardware with our next-gen firewalls, but also software and hardware-related products, as you've seen in Mike's slides, where we have multiple components of the layered approach effect, if you will. And as a cybersecurity specialist, CTS is well certified and equipped to really train and have been trained themselves on all vertical instances, doesn't matter what type of industry, all vertical environments, to have that best cybersecurity threat landscape and design for that optimum performance and reliability that everyone looks for. And having that shift and paradigm shift we saw early on, that work from home transition, like Mike Nero had mentioned, we have been kind of positioning ourselves for this, where an example would be we would offload remote control instances by a separate product, secure mobile access, versus adding licenses to the firewall, which you can remote in as if you're at home. We have always had a offline, if you will, product called secure mobile access, which takes that burden away from that firewall and allows remote users to come in separately, if you will, and have that same security background. And the idea of this, and CTS as a partner of us, is they're aware of all these known and unknown threats that Mike talked about, especially all the different vectors coming from the IoT, the Internet of Things, those devices, and really make sure that the recommendations are done to protect your most valuable assets. And a lot of that's the endpoints, the users. And the touch point, again, as far as remote offices are concerned, in that wide security solution, we've always had what we call SD-WAN, secure wide area network coverage, regardless of those firewalls or endpoints and the size and scalability of those remote locations, one user, two user remote locations, or multiple. We're scalable to be able to adopt that same security ethices across all different locations. So as a partner to understand CTS, they've been there, been doing it for a while with SonicWall, have all the necessary certifications to be able to inform you folks what needs to be done from a security perspective. I think that's pretty well it. We have a few more minutes. I think there's one more slide for you, Michelle, and I want to thank everyone from myself and on behalf of Mike as well. Appreciate everyone listening in, but I know Michelle's going to wrap this up.
So first and foremost, I want to thank, Sonic Wall for the presentation. I know that overall security is key right now for all businesses and really all workers that are accessing or leveraging that remote office experience while we're dealing with this new normal. There are many solutions out there that offer layered technology solution and support. And Sonic Wall is a forefront. But what I'd like to say is that I hope that this seminar gave you an overview of what it is to have a firewall, what it means not to have one, that first level of protection. Understand that not only do you need an on-premise or a virtual appliance, but you need to layer that security in your environment with other things, patch management, antivirus, best practice, hygiene on so many things when we use our day-to-day technology. So my question really to ask after this whole presentation is, where are you and what is it that you need to do to shore up your network and security report card? Exactly where are you and are you protected? And that's really the question. So this was not meant to be a sales presentation. It was really to educate the end user community on the importance of protecting their environments against all of these exploitations. If you would like or have additional questions about state of the art firewall solutions, or you want a firewall management check or a security audit, by all means, reach out to me. And we will get you in touch internally with our people here, or reach out to our partners and get those answers and solutions to you. We are going to give everyone a copy of the 2020 cyber threat report that Sonic Wall has. It will be emailed to you with a copy of any questions that were asked today, in addition to a link to this recording. With that said, Sonic Wall did have a raffle that they donated a duffel bag with some goodies in it, along with a small gift that we'll send out to all participants today. But that raffle winner was Steve Carr from Compass Medical. Steve, if you are in the audience, I will send you, still in the audience, I will send you an email for that address, and we'll get that out today. So I guess for now, I want to say thank you for working through our little technology difficulties today. Thank you for your knowledgeable participation today. Knowledge is power, and the more that we can share with each other, the better off we all are. Thank you to Sonic Wall for their input, and thank you to the Chamber for getting this out. So we hope that you all have a great and productive day, and that you look at how you score on that network security report card. Have a great day, and we will see you the next time. Bye-bye now.